I check with my tech master, make sure we're good to go. Robert Alexander Dossard, my namesake. Initials are RAD. That's right. I planned that. That was a dad thing. Okay? So we good to go there, home slice? All right, I get the thumbs up. Biracial in a racial America. All right, I'm going to tune into that's right, your favorite radio station, WIFM. What's in it for me? If you're going to give me 30 minutes of your time, what are you going to get from this? Well, let's face it. Race is a part of your life, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. Everything has an undercurrent of race in it. And if you go, well, Robert, I don't see color. Yeah, you do. You do. Okay? And if you think you don't, let me give you an example. Who's the first black president? If you say Barack Hussein Obama, guess what? You're wrong. He's the first biracial president. But you don't hear that a lot, do you? You don't hear about him being the first biracial president. You hear about Barack Obama being the first black president. So why am I doing this? And who is it for? It's for everybody in this country, because everybody in this country is affected by race. And I mean, from the TV shows I used to watch as a kid, everything's a story. From Hazel and, the Munsters and Gomer Pyle. The Munsters about a Munster family. Gomer Pyle was about a private and his sergeant. All the way to Dallas, about that oil family from Dallas, Texas. And, all the way to Roots, right? They followed the genealogy of the author of Roots, Alex Haley. So I'm going to give you historical things about me, but guess what you're going to find? You're going to find you're somewhere in that story as well. Maybe when I talk about separate but equal, you'll think about, hey, my parents used to talk about that. Or if you're my age, I'm in my 60s, I'm 63, I can actually look at separate but equal in my own life. Here's an example. I grew up in Virginia. Loving versus the state of Virginia was the case that went before the Supreme Court that made biracial marriages a thing. In other words, the marriage I'm in, a biracial marriage, was illegal in the state I grew up in my lifetime. So race is there. Even in the current political climate, some of the politicians are trying to court certain votes. And if they want the minority vote, they act a certain way. They go to a certain place or do the commencement ceremony at a certain college or university. So race is an undercurrent. And I would argue that point with anyone and probably win. So let's talk about community, okay? I grew up in the Army community and within the black community. And within the black community, we had the church community. I was affected by the community I grew up in. We have two boys, my wife and I. We tell our boys, you show me your friends, I'll show you your future. That's true for adults as well, isn't it? If you were to look at your group of close friends, they're probably very much like you. If you're in construction, maybe your friends are from construction. If you're in software like my wife, maybe your friends are from your software years or related to the industry. Growing up as an Army brat, you want to talk about a community? The Army community is amazing, okay? I remember going on base. When I first got my driver's license, I was 16. And I go on base with $5 and my ID card. I could spend all day. It was like Club Med. You could go bowling for $1. You get a tray of food for $1. When I say a tray of food, I'm not talking about a Happy Meal. I'm talking about a hamburger or a hot dog, a side order of fries, a slice of pie, a large drink for $1. And on base at that time, I don't know how it is now, there was no taxes. So if things cost you $1, it was $1. So I could bowl, have a full meal, go to the movie theater, see a movie for 50 cents, get popcorn for $0.25, drink for $0.25. So I've spent $3 and I've spent hours on base being entertained. And we had field house where, I could play basketball, do archery, go and box and work out. There were all sorts of facilities. Gosh, even as my father was an NCO, it's called a non-commissioned officer. So we had an NCO club where my parents could go to parties. We had an NCO swimming pool. We had a sand pool that we could go to. So there was all sorts of facilities I had access to as a member of the Army community. But let me back up. I'm actually biracial by birth from Frankfurt, Germany. And I was adopted in Frankfurt, Germany by a black couple. Now you'll hear me talk about my parents being black. I believe my parents are my God-given parents. They're the parents that adopted me from that orphanage. Yes, God had to hook up the fact that I had to be born. And so yes, I've actually been in touch with my quote-unquote biological mother. And I've let her know that my life has turned out in a remarkable way. And so by putting me up for adoption, she did me a favor because I was adopted by what I believe were my God-given parents. And I've had every opportunity as anyone watching this video in the United States. So being brought to the United States at 13, I became a citizen of the United States. And I was also baptized into the Christian faith. And those are two decisions. Becoming a U.S. citizen and becoming a Christian by faith are two decisions that I did at 13 that I've not regretted. Two amazing decisions. I was also a member of the black community because my parents were black. So I lived in a predominantly black neighborhood. I went to an all-black church. And so a lot of times you'll hear me take liberties with black gestures or black culture references is because I grew up black. And just like Barack Obama, although he was biracial, he's the first black president, I was treated as black growing up. But there was a rift within the black community. Spike Lee got it right when he had in his movies the jigaboos and the wannabes. The people with dark skin and nappy hair did not always get along with the light-skinned people who tried to straighten their hair and quote-unquote look white. And I was accused of being able to pass. In other words, being able to pass as something other than black. And I was told by the members of the black community, well, people don't even know how to treat you because they don't know what you are. So I was considered high yellow, which was not a compliment, by the way. It was very much an insult. And, of course, there would be the light-skinned people who would tease the dark-skinned blacks. But there was a rift within the black community within those two areas. So, community. You may be a member of the Jewish community, the Muslim community. You may be Indian, you may be Sikh, you may be, whatever your box is that society puts you in, there's a sense of community. I know a lot of people, I trained a lot of people within the Jewish faith. I worship a Jewish carpenter. So, and they were Jewish a lot of times by birth. They just grew up in the Jewish culture. And then some are Orthodox or practicing Jews where they practice all the, Passover and all the holidays that the Jewish faith has. They make sure they celebrate those. And of course, we all know if you're a member of the Christian faith that, Easter and Christmas, you may not go to church on any other day of the year, but you're going to make it there in your new outfit on Easter, and you're going to somehow get there for Jesus' birthday. You're going to make sure you get to church. So a sense of community is very important. And being a member of a race puts you in a box. Black box, white box, Hispanic box, Asian box. So society will try to put you in a box. I remember when I was registering for college in LaGrange College, and this is the mid-'80s, and a lady comes up and she goes, are you Hispanic? I go, no, ma'am. She goes, are you Hawaiian? I go, no, ma'am. I go, are you trying to determine if I'm black or white? She goes, yes. I go, the answer is yes. In other words, I've always considered myself a member of the human race, but I can't tell you how many people, it's crazy. People will flat out ask you. My youngest son is blonde hair and blue eye, but we went to Hawaii one time and he got really dark and his hair almost got lighter. And when we came home, we were in a grocery store. And I remember this black woman coming up to me and go, okay, I got to know what he is. She was serious as a heart attack. She had to know like what race he was because he was so dark skinned and his blonde hair and blue eyes just threw her for a loop. But she had to know. So what box you're in affects your community. Well, what if you're a member of a couple of different communities? So growing up, I went to a private Catholic school called Walsingham Academy in Williamsburg, Virginia. And the cool thing about my father in his military deployment, as a weapons expert initially, he would tour with the weapons, so we didn't have to move. So I'm very unusual for an Army brat. I grew up in the same town from kindergarten all the way through graduation of high school. So I went to the same private Catholic school, which was almost all white. And, you know, I can count on one hand how many Black people went to that school in the 12 years I attended, or 13 if you include kindergarten. So that's one culture I grew up in. And I really had a unique experience going to that school. And I lived in a military neighborhood for a while until my father retired from the military. He got a job at Anheuser-Busch, which put us solidly in the middle class. That was a very good job back in Williamsburg. And there were professors at William & Mary College that were trying to get shifts at the brewery because it paid so well. And it also allowed my father to retire early, and I'm so glad he had the blessing of that job. But they hired a lot of ex-military guys at the plant because they were good with structure, they were good with following orders, and I eventually worked for Anheuser-Busch in Cartersville, Georgia, because my father had such a pleasant experience, and it was a job that I had when I met my wife. I always wanted to have the type of job that could support a family and have the type of benefits. But when we realized that we were going to have a 2-career household and a 2-income household, I figured I'd leave the job that I hated because I was training 3 days a week and going to Anheuser-Busch 3 days a week for their shift work. And I was making about the same at each. So when we decided my wife was going to work, I quit the brewery job and kept the training job, and I've been a trainer ever since. I have a small personal training studio, and I love what I do. I mean, if I get to the point where I'm just doing it as a volunteer, I'll probably do it. But fitness is awesome. But back on point, race. How is it affected? Well, being on base, a lot of times it was like I said, you know, my father was an NCO, he had stripes, where there's, you know, commissioned officers. So an officer has an officer mess hall, an officers club. So they had a whole different lifestyle. It was a lot nicer, but I didn't know because as an NCO, I never experienced that. And I just thought I won the lottery by being in this country and having all the resources of being on base. So race came into play when I would go to school and come home. There was a little bit of a pull. So I'd pick up, you know, a term at school like golly gee. And I'd get off the bus, I'm like, golly gee, let's go play basketball. And my friends that I lived around go, hey, we don't do golly gee here. Boom, conflict. And my father, with the resources of a military base, said, look, son, bullies aren't crazy. You're just a low-hanging fruit. You're easy to beat. So I'm going to have you go out to the military base and take boxing. You ask for Sergeant so-and-so, and I learned how to box against enlisted men at a military base. So literally, when I got picked on by the neighborhood bully, let's just say I beat him from the school bus to his front door. And I never got picked on by him again. And I know before you come at me with the, oh, violence doesn't solve anything, let me tell you what. If you've ever been bullied, let me tell you, violence puts it to an end real quick. Now, there was a way my younger son, who went to a elementary school near our home, he was bullied on the bus. And I said, well, let's give the school a chance to handle it. And he told the assistant principal who the boys were. She called him into her office and she goes, before you answer the question, let me let you know that we have cameras on the school bus. She did not say she had cameras on that school bus. So you want to tell me what's happening with Matei Dothard? And, well, we may be messing with him. Okay, well, here's what's going to happen. If you continue to mess with him, you won't be allowed to ride the bus. If you mess with him in the school, you won't be allowed to attend this school. And I'm going to send an email to the effect of this conversation to your parents so that they know. And man, a few weeks later, I asked my son, hey, are those boys still bothering you? He goes, Dad, they won't even look at me. So, you know, there's an example of a nonviolent way to handle a bully. The school handled it perfectly. But one of my boys is a registered black belt, the one that's doing the tech for this podcast. And one, I've trained in martial arts because, let's face it, there are some evil people out there. And talking them down doesn't always work. So, back on point. High yellow. Within the black community, there was discord between, like I said, white, the ones that could almost pass for white or people didn't know what I was. There was also back when I was a kid, it was called shucking and jiving. Whoa, what's up? But when you go to work, I was a waiter, and you had to speak the Queen's English to communicate with customers. And it was literally called talking white. And you had to turn it on and off. And some people that worked in Colonial Williamsburg literally were character actors, and they had to turn on the historical shucking and jiving. And they had to play a role. Well, I felt like I was almost playing a role sometimes because I wanted to be accepted in my neighborhood, and I also wanted to be accepted at school. So how many times have you been put in a box? What's the old Asians are good at math or whatever the box is. They're all just as stupid as one is just as dumb as the next. It's just stereotypes. It's just people saying what they think you should be. Well, you may want to be different than that. And you have to prove your difference in a lot of cases. And for me, it didn't allow me to have a support structure on my own. For example, I had the church community. So as long as I was doing something in related to the church, like I was a member of the usher board, we passed the auction or the collection plate during the service. But I was always taught to volunteer at the church you go to. But what about you? What do you do to get outside your box? And how does society fight that? It's funny, one of my training clients is a world-renowned eye surgeon. And yet he had some static from one of his neighbors. And it's because he's of Indian descent. And he knew it. And I almost wish he could wear a sign like, hey, I'm a doctor. My wife's a teacher. We're pillars of the community. We're here to help society. Why are you throwing so much hate toward us? But yet they couldn't fall back on that. They just had to be upstanding, decent people and hope that, the legal system or the fact that this person wouldn't do something that would get them in legal trouble as their protection. Well, within my lifetime, there wasn't that protection. I mean, I've actually gone to games where Walsingham was playing in a place called Gloucester, and it was one race, Walsingham was another, and we had to get a police escort out of Gloucester because the coach feared for our school buses we were leaving. So my point is, as you've tried to get out of your box or as you've gone through your life, race has played a role in your influence. And even the talk. I gave my boys the talk, like, hey, if you get pulled over, you speak your name clearly. You follow the police officer's instructions. If they tell you to get out of the car and break dance or do the Watusi, you get out and figure out how to do it. We can sue them later. But I did that for my boy's safety. My talk was different when my dad gave me the talk. He goes, son, there's such thing as privilege. And he meant white privilege. And he goes, you don't have it. So if you and your private school friends get in trouble, guess what? They're going to get bailed out and go home and sleep in their bed. We don't have the resources nor the clout to bail you out and get you out of jail. So if you get in trouble, you go to jail. And let me tell you, that was all I needed to hear. And I didn't do anything to get put in jail. And when my friends would go, oh, well, let's go drink on the parkway. I heard that's fun. Yeah, y'all go ahead. I'm headed home. Because I knew. I had been given the 411 on, hey, here's what happens if you get in legal trouble. You are on your own, home slice, so don't do it. So as I'm going through, after the talk, it's funny how race came up in little incidences. I'll give you one. I worked at this restaurant on Duke of Gloucester Street. I believe it's still there, called the Trellis Restaurant in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I waited tables at some of the nicest restaurants in Williamsburg. It was amazing. And I was a good waiter. I was tops in sales at the end of the day. You know, they register how much food you sold and alcohol and all this stuff. And it was great. The owner's daughter went to school with me and actually didn't date her. We went to the movies together once. Next thing you know, I could do nothing wrong in that restaurant. My tickets weren't turning fast enough. My sales were expected because I'd always sold well. I couldn't do anything right. I had to leave that restaurant because I went out with the owner's daughter one time to the movies. Now, could a white guy be just as, chastised by her father at the restaurant? Maybe. I didn't see it. And Williamsburg's not a big town. And she was a popular gal. So people loved to take her out. She was very attractive and, there were a lot of us courting her for her attention. But I don't recall anybody else having to change jobs because of that. And one thing I love about my identity was that it thins you from the herd. I always tell my boys, what are you going to do to thin yourself from the herd? Your education. How you appear. Are your clothes clean? Are you clean? Okay? I've always told my boys, you keep a clean car. So when you get pulled over, they don't look at the car and go, whoo, I don't know what this guy does for a living, but must not be very good at it. Okay? So I learned at a young age, you know what? What I do matters. And that's why I found sports. And let me tell you, if there's one thing that transcends race, it's athletics. Because as an all-state player at a small private Catholic school, it was an identity. It was really cool. I could go out on a date on Richmond Road and go to a restaurant, and the owner would come up and go, "Are you Robert Dother?" I'm like, of course I'm thinking about all the stuff I've done, like, "Yes, sir." He goes, "Well, I heard that you took Walsingham to state. Your meal's on us tonight." And it may not be a big deal to you to get your meal comped at a restaurant, but it had never happened to me before, and it has never happened to me since. So it was pretty darn cool. And people knew you. We had a young man, I'll just give his first name, Rex. He stole all the time. As a matter of fact, at the time of this broadcast, he's in prison for theft. He stole his whole life. Every time we go into a store, "Rex, there's nothing for you to steal in here. Get out of my store." But when I would go in and be like, "Hey, Robert, great job, man. Walsingham went to state. That's awesome." And even when we didn't go to state, people knew me as an athlete. I grew up in the same town as Lawrence Taylor, the famous New York Giants linebacker, the Hall of Famer. And, everywhere he went, "Oh, that's LT. That's LT." And he was a hot mess, okay? And I'm not saying anything out of school. Look at Lawrence Taylor's legal troubles since he got out of the NFL, okay? He had the same legal troubles when he was in high school, college, and pros. It's just that he was so talented, there are people that clean up his mess. So am I worried about being sued by him? No. Google search it. So, identity, right? As an athlete, that's why I tell any parent, get your child involved in amateur athletics because it instills discipline. They get on a schedule. And one time a preacher at one of the revivals we had said, "You know what happens between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock? Most sports practices. You know what else happens?" And I don't know if it's true now, but it was true when he gave this lecture. Teen pregnancies. Because that's when they hook up. They hook up after school. So, you know where your kids are. They're at practice. And I don't know of any case of kids hooking up, and worrying about teen pregnancy during a sports team practice anywhere at any time. So you can let me know if I'm wrong. But having that identity is one of the few things that really, transcends race. And you see that in society, right? The Rat Pack had Sammy Davis Jr. And, you look at all the Hollywood stories about how he could do things like stay in the hotel that he was actually performing at. One of the few, because his talent rose above the racism. Eventually, I'm sure he's had plenty of stories where it didn't. There's that famous movie Ray, where he couldn't stay or couldn't do certain things, and it affected a performance in Georgia. And later, one of his songs becomes the state song of Georgia. So it comes around. I love redemption stories like that. Plus the work ethic. Okay. It was cool being on base. I remember shooting baskets one time, and an enlisted man comes up to me and goes, "Man, your shot's horrible, young man." And of course, I didn't say, "Thank you, Captain Obvious." I go, "Yes, sir," because that's how you address people when I was younger. And he goes, "Would you like to learn how to shoot better?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." So he taught me how to shoot the ball straight up in the air. He said, when you can do that 100 times, then you aim at the basket, and all you have to worry about is how far you shoot it, not whether it'll go to the right or to the left. And then you find spots on the floor where you just take hundreds of shots from that spot until you make sure you don't miss that shot. That piece of advice in one afternoon made me an all-state player. And I went to a private Catholic school. I don't know how it is now, but private Catholic schools did not produce a lot of all-state basketball players when I was younger, okay? And it was awesome. My dad was one of those dads who didn't play catch with me in the backyard. He was what was called a provider. My dad felt like if you're going to run track, you're going to have track spikes. If you're going to play basketball, you're going to have the right equipment. He made sure I had the latest cleats, the latest shoes, the proper equipment, and he supported me financially so that I didn't have to work little odd jobs waiting tables when I was in a sport. It was during the summer or in between sports. And I had the blessing of working for Greek-owned restaurants. So if you were in Williamsburg, Virginia in the 70s or 80s, there was these Greek-owned restaurants along this road called Richmond Road. And let me tell you, if you did a good job at one, you had a job at all of them. And they were so kind. One would have the whole restaurant at the Ivy House eat dinner, family style, before you worked. Because his theory was no one should go hungry that works at a restaurant. And it was so cool. It affected me even as a business owner. I've been a business owner for 20 years. I've never had a staff meeting where I either didn't take my staff to food or have food brought in during the meeting because of the kindness that was shown to me. But it was really cool that, Mr. Nick at Mr. Nick's Pancake House he would see the basketball schedule. He goes, "Robert, you need these weekend days off. We're very busy on the weekends." I go, "Yes, sir, Mr. Nick. We have games on those days." He goes, "Okay, those days you have off. The other days you come here, black pants, white shirt. Yes, sir, I'll be here. You don't be late, okay?" And of course, I was never late. And anytime an opportunity came up, one of my teammates was last name Majerus. His father bought the 1776 hotel, which is very exciting because he was a restaurant owner. He bought an entire hotel. And I said, "Mr. Majerus, we're very excited about, you purchasing this hotel." He goes, "Robert, well, of course." I don't know why they all sounded like mobsters, but they were all very kind. And he goes, "You going to work for me?" "Yes." I'm like, "Of course, I'd love to. You want me to work in one of your restaurants?" He goes, "Don't worry about that. You come black pants, white shirt, bring your social security card." Let me tell you, I unloaded buses, I waited tables, I did banquets, I swept the lobby, whatever they told me to do. I did everything but landscaping. But let me tell you, I never filled out an application for employment in Williamsburg for a job. Because I worked hard, and that became my identity, at least on Richmond Road, in those Greek-owned restaurants. And they were very kind to people that worked hard. And let me tell you, nobody worked harder than them. I don't ever remember being in Mr. Majerus' hotel where he or one of his family members weren't present, or in Mr. Nick's seafood place or his pancake house where he or one of his family members wasn't present. They worked as hard as anybody that worked for them. So, back on point. Again, the Greek community, okay? Army community, Greek community, the church community. I saw that work. It was so cool. I went to a Black Baptist church called St. John's Baptist Church in Williamsburg, Virginia. I pray it's still there. It's a great church. And like I said, I was a member of the usher board, so we passed the plate, the offering plate. But I got to see the Black church community in action every week. I remember my mother one time, she wasn't feeling well. She goes, you go to Miss So-and-so, you make sure I'm in the program under sick and shut in. Because if you got sick, you could actually get on the program and there'd be 4 or 5 cars in your driveway at the end of service. People would bring a covered plate, they come clean your house, they come take care of your kids, they come see about you. And that happened week in, week out for years. The Black community taking care of themselves. And when a church would come for revival, and there'd be a busload of people, they'd go through the service. In the basement of the church, they'd often prepare a meal where both churches would go into the basement of the church and pray and break bread together. And it was really cool to see that. And letters of reference and explaining difficult things. I remember the Reverend Solomon M. Wesley when I was a candidate for baptism. And like I said, I was baptized at 13. So imagine how young I was. And I'm in this meeting with this pastor, and you had to learn about different religions. And he looked at me and he go, now, Robert, when Buddha was around, Buddha was looking for the truth. When Muhammad was around, Muhammad was looking for the truth. Jesus said, I am the truth. Which one you going to follow, boy? I'm like, well, I'm taking bachelor number 3. No, it was an easy choice. It was easy to be a fan of Christ when it was put so plainly. So back then you were a candidate for baptism, and if you went through the courses and understood that you were, giving your life to Christ and going to follow his teachings and form a relationship with him, then you could be baptized into the faith. But and I don't remember anybody ever failing the class or not becoming a candidate for baptism because they were not educated or a scoundrel in some way. So once you were candidate for baptism, you were eventually baptized. So that's how my faith journey. But I loved the community. And I admit, when I first started going to church, I only went because of Vacation Bible School. They had softball, basketball. We'd make little pot holders. We did all. It was fun. It was a fun place to go in the summer. And sometimes I would go for the fun. Sometimes you go for the cute girl that you're playing softball against. But my mother didn't care because she knew sooner or later you're going to hear about Christ. And you'll make that move when you need to. And it happened. And that's why when both of my boys, they went to a church, a mega church, they gave candy out to kids and they had all sorts of activities. And my wife's like, man, they're selling this really hard to the kids. I'm like, doesn't matter, babe. Doesn't matter. Every week they're going to learn about Christ. That's all it takes. And both of my boys have been baptized by me into the faith. So one, during COVID, we actually used a neighbor's pool. So he wanted to be baptized, but the church is closed. Well, it doesn't matter. Neighbor has a pool. You can be baptized. But after he realized what it meant, and my older son was actually baptized in the River Jordan. Then I believe, let me check, you turned around and baptized your mother, didn't you? Which was awesome. So that was quite the day. Quite the day. And that was in the River Jordan, Israel. That was really cool. So you're in different communities. Some communities, you don't have a choice. I'm biracial. I'm a member of that community. Some communities you can choose. For example, there's an organization called Rotary. It started in Chicago with 3 businessmen that rotated between businesses. And they wanted to find whatever needed to be done in the community, and they would put their resources and their time toward it. And I belonged to Rotary. And it was awesome. I met some remarkable men in Rotary. And I saw the impact and how a group of people just looking to do good in the community, how they can impact the community. And Rotary is now international. I could go to meetings when I went over to Europe and get little flags from their Rotary group. But you can choose your community a lot of times, like Rotary, like your church, like your synagogue, whatever, your faith holds. But folks, stop putting people in boxes. Realize that there are going to be a lot more people like me that are in a couple of different boxes. And just like when my wife and I first got married over 25 years ago, we didn't know what our kids would look like. And so we looked at O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown Simpson. We're like, oh, well, they look kind of like us, so maybe our kids will look like their kids. We couldn't be further from the truth. One's dark-haired, dark-eyed. One's blonde-haired, blue-eyed. Although he's never been tested to formally be, I better stop. It's a joke I've been telling way too long. Anyway, once we start mixing those communities, for example, one of my clients is Asian. He's married to a white woman, and he actually was at the White House during the signing of the legislation that codified biracial marriage. And I'm like, why did you want to be at that meeting? He goes, Robert, I'm in a biracial marriage. And I didn't think of Asian and white as being a biracial marriage, but it is. So whether you choose a community, whether you are a member of the community, my prayer from this brief talk is that you're more open to different communities and you're more open to changing your views on one individual community or communities getting together. Because as I've struggled with the whole gay, trans, and different things, because it wasn't something that I grew up with. I mean, I had a first cousin who was gay, and I thought it was a birth defect. I said, what's wrong with you? He goes, my nickname among my relatives was Bobby. He goes, Bobby, what's your favorite color? I said, blue. He goes, why? I said, because of all the colors, I like blue the most. He said, out of the two sexes, I like men more than women. And to this day, it has never been a better explanation for the gay and lesbian lifestyle that I could ever receive. And I received that as a child. And it made sense. And it stopped me from treating him like he had a birth defect. And it treated him the way he should be treated. So hopefully through this dialogue, maybe you'll treat people differently. Maybe you treat yourself differently. Because, sometimes we do bad things, right? And we want to be forgiven and go, you know what? I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. I'm a different person. I've had different experiences, and now I can change some things. So I'm going to. So my prayer is we continue this dialogue. Hopefully you like this podcast and you'll tune in for a few more. But the main thing is, when you leave this podcast, open your mind, open your heart, and be willing to change your behavior if it's needed. All right? Biracial and a racial America, baby. First one in the books.